Hi, everyone. It's John Phinney, the CEO of Convergence, and I'm here to talk about how to make more effective data procurement decisions. In episode 1, we spoke about making sure that you really understand the experience you want. And now in episode 2, we're going to talk about you do know what you want, the experience you need, and now it's time to create an RFP to make sure that you do invite the right provider to the table. Okay, in segment 2, we're going to talk about the questions you need to ask the data providers that you bring into an RFP. And remember, you know which type of company you want, and maybe it's 3 of them because you just need the data because you have the expertise. So you want data. That's your experience. How do you compare and contrast the firms? This is a very tricky subject, and it's loaded with footfalls potentially. So you need to really issue a thorough RFP, and I'm going to talk about some of the more relevant questions that you need to ask, having gone through this process myself, being both very pleased and also displeased with the experience. So it cuts both ways, and I'm trying to give you the benefit of my thinking. First of all, you need to ask them about the depth of the data. Think of it as the count. If somebody asks you how many entities are you tracking within a specific segment or a specific domain, you need to understand the numbers here, because whatever you pay, there's a unit cost per opportunity or per artifact or entity that you need to understand. So the depth of the data. 2 is whether that data is current or non-current, sometimes referred to as active or inactive. Sometimes you hear the term graveyard information. There is value in that information, by the way. However, just make sure you ask. If someone says, I have X number of entities in my database, thus depth, and you say, well, how many are active, because that's what you care about, and they say 3,000 are active, you're really buying 3,000 names, not 10,000 names. So depth is very, very important. The second feature is what we call breadth. And I'm going to use asset management because that's the space I operate in, and there's a lot of confusion about this. For example, if you're looking for asset management funds or funds across the industry, there are at least 7 types, maybe even 8 types of funds or fund structures that you may want to see. You need to ask that question. How many of those fund structures do you have, and can you offer me in the database? Obviously, the numbers are important as well, and the question about active and inactive needs to apply. I'll give you some examples because there's a lot of fine firms out there. PitchBook, great firm. They provide private equity and venture capital data by and large. If you wanted hedge fund data, you wouldn't go to PitchBook. But they have a tremendous offering in those other areas. Vice versa, if you want hedge fund data, you probably would not go to PitchBook because they do specialize in private equity and venture capital. You'd probably go to somebody else. So you really need to define, again, the depth and the breadth of what it is that you need. Once you know that, and again, you're sort of moving down the analytical pathway, you then need to understand the subject coverage, meaning what type of data artifact do you have surrounding the entity of interest, whether it's a fund or an advisor in the asset management industry or the investor. You really want to understand how many artifacts surround that data and what those artifacts are. For example, is it reference data, contact information? Is it asset level? Is it strategy level? There are so many different cuts of data that are out there and available that you really need, again, to know what you want, right? And more importantly, you've got to be able to articulate that to any of the providers. You then need to ask a very important question of everyone, and that really is the source of their data. Where are you getting this data? Is it coming from a private source, meaning directly from the entity, which introduces conflicts and questions about completeness and also accuracy? Is it coming from the public domain where the data provider can tie every data artifact back to a physical document and representation made by a fund or an advisor? It's very important you understand that, because the completeness question that I referred to earlier in depth is how many funds, how many advisors or entities do you really have in your database? And once you know that, you can then talk about the independence of them, because the independence of them will lead to the next characteristic in question, which is the quality of the data. Can you verify the information? Is there a way to do that? Again, each company is different based on its business model. The data collectors and the data distributors will have a harder time representing quality statistics simply because they don't know. They themselves are getting data from potentially inside sources, meaning directly from the entity of study. And there's lots of reasons why entities of study won't give you 100% of the information that, for example, you can get from a data creator. So again, a little bit of a nuance, a little bit of a different model, but very, very important. You also want to talk specifically about accuracy, again, meaning, does anybody give you a rep around quality? For example, a warranty, meaning, hey, if my data turns out to be wrong, will I give you a rebate on the fee? Now, the data creator is more likely to give you that warranty than the data collector or distributor, because they themselves are validating all of the inputs and creating a lot of original content off of those inputs. So the data creator has a higher standard, quite frankly, around accuracy because they need to. Also, many data creators offer predictive analytics. And for the statistical-oriented user out there, you know what that means. It means that your data has to be long in terms of time series, and it has to be accurate. Because if you're going to predict something or narrow a set of actions to a likely set of behaviors, you need to be pretty confident about your data. You heard me talk about original content. I want you to think about this as sort of like creative programming on Netflix or Hulu or Amazon Prime, right? You know that on those platforms, you get different content. Some of that content is original. Some of that content is not original, meaning you can get Gilligan's Island reruns on all of them in all likelihood, but you choose to engage with a platform based, quite frankly, on the original content that they have to offer. Data companies, particularly the creators, pride themselves on original content, meaning telling you things, creating data and telling you things about that data that you can't see from the collector's source or the distributor's source because it's not there. They don't create. They just collect and they curate, but they don't create, by and large, original content. There's always an exception to the rule, but the creator is pretty much the creator for those reasons. The time series is important. When you evaluate companies, industries, segments, and trends, you have to have time series. That time series cuts into two categories. What's called temporal, meaning as is today, based on today's rules applied historically, versus as was, which is the business rules that existed 10 years ago, created an observation 10 years ago, which may no longer be valid, meaning the rules change, okay? So the data company that has both the as-is ability and the as-was ability, being able to spin up different views of history based on the rule set at the time, again, is going to give the user more optionality. The last item is the annual subscription value. You do want to understand, number one, what you're paying for. More importantly, you want to determine, are there ways for you to splice what you're paying for and get what you need rather than everything. And two is you want to understand the termination provisions around quality specifically. I mentioned this earlier. It's not a common condition in data, meaning a lot of data companies will not give you, other than a pro rata rebate, anything you quote unquote experienced, even if you find it to have been suspect. So I want to end segment 2 by saying the RFP is very important. The creator has an additional set of RFP factors around the subject matter experts. You want to make sure you add that to the RFP as well. So I want to thank you very much and hope that in segment 2, you're now able to connect it to segment 1. You understand the service provider you need or you want based on the experience. And now you want to really vet them and make sure you understand fully and transparently the data that they are offering you. I want to thank you again and look forward to talking to you about the return on investment aspect of this in segment 3. Thank you very much.